So one of my subscribers, a certain Vault 13 Dweller 15, asked a great question. It was about one of my other videos where I'm talking about addictions and how the drugs that are used mimic certain innate predispositions that we all have, and that's why they are addictive. Now, this viewer asked the question, how do non-chemical addictions, like addiction to social media, video games, or pornography, for example, relate to lack of meaning, safety, and belonging? Do they work in a similar way, like chemical drugs? So what they are referring to here is, in that other video, I talk about how a lot of the addictive behaviors exist because the neurochemicals involved mimic systems in the brain that are designed toward certain functions, and identified mainly the quest for meaning, the quest for safety, and the quest for belonging. All three of these things are strongly connected to our survival, and so they're very strongly innate. There's a lot of selection pressure that was put on them during the course of human evolution and proto-human evolution. Most of these systems were most likely in place long before Homo sapiens emerged as a species. But the short answer to this question is yes, they work the same way. And in fact, you can also add several more addictions that the viewer didn't mention, but are in the same group. Gambling, shopping addiction, fitness addiction, and eating disorders all fall under this too, both the overeating and the undereating, which if you want, I can get into that in another video perhaps. But the bottom line is these are all addictive behaviors that are driven by the same neurochemical systems. And maybe it might help for me to clarify a little bit what I'm talking about here. So when I say meaning, what I'm talking about is how the brain is a meaning-making organ, in the sense that the function of it, one of the primary functions of it, is to acquire sensory data and then process it extremely heavily in order to come up with a compact expression of what all that data actually means for me, for my survival, for who I am, for my sense of self, all that. And dreams are a big part of this, as I've talked about in other videos, is this ongoing process in the background. But the brain is just constantly working on this. And one of the reasons why dreaming can be so useful is because a lot of this activity, this meaning-making activity, happens while we're asleep because the brain is not busy doing other things. So it has the time and the energy to go ahead and work on this background process. Safety, that's an obvious one. We're always trying to find safety. Obviously, an unsafe environment is not one that's going to lead to further reproduction and so forth. And therefore, there's strong systems in place, the fear systems and so forth. And then belonging is about our social instincts, which I've written an entire book about called The Jungian Analysis of Toxic Modern Society. That's available. You can check that out on my website. There's links there to get that if you want. But long story short, belonging is that sense of, I feel like I am in a satisfactory and safe and secure bond with not only a significant other, but also a friends and family group, a community, and even nature itself. So what are each of these three specifically targeting? In the meaning system, if you will, during the brain's quest for meaning, many of the things that it looks for involve things like resource acquisition, forming meaningful social bonds, the drive for reproductive success, the drive for social power. Those are all things that are in line with this quest for meaning that the brain is occupied in. It's also looking for more abstract senses of meaning, and you can look at that as what's behind a lot of our scientific activity. We're trying to make sense of the world. There's a lot of that there too. And many of the drugs that are stimulants or hit the stimulant system basically rev this up into overdrive. And the rush that you get from it, in the sense of a drug, is that you feel artificially that whatever it is that you're doing is infused with a massive amount of meaning. This is also, you can see this in people who are manic. That's not caused by chemicals necessarily, although there are quite a few drugs out there that can push people into this mental state if they're vulnerable to it. But again, that's a subject for another day. Safety is the avoiding, not only avoiding of physical danger, but the avoiding of social danger, which would be avoiding the dangers of ostracization or rejection or bereavement. All of these things revolve around safety, because early in hominin evolution, probably 6 million years ago or so, there was a shift from the previous species towards a more socially coherent species. And that led ultimately to Homo sapiens, where we are now. And those things were never lost because they're very powerful. If you have a species that works very well together, then our survivability goes way up, especially in the face of a lot of predation, which is what was going on during the time of our human evolution at that time. So there's a lot of drive towards seeking safety, but much of it is aimed at social safety. So it's not just about feeling physically safe, but it's also about feeling socially safe. And as you can see, there is overlap between this and the quest for meaning. The sense of belonging also overlaps with this too, if you include the social safety business, because it's seeking those long-term, trusting, and secure bonds with other people. All of these things were densely connected to our survival, and so there was a strong a strong selection pressure for these systems to be put into place. So the next question then is the question that the viewer brought up. Do the above addictions work similarly? And of course, the answer is yes. And it's because the same neurochemical systems underlie both the behaviors. Okay, so for example, in the quest for meaning or belonging, you can see things like social media addiction, because the activity of social media gives you the illusion that you're building these long-term trusting bonds that the belonging quest is all about. And also sometimes the meaning. If you get bunches and bunches of likes, it makes you feel like you're moving up on the social totem pole, as it were. And so that's what fuels that kind of addictive behavior. That's what the rush is all about. Okay, what about the other ones? Video games, many video games, particularly the ones that people get addicted to, mostly men who get addicted to video games, have to do with a power fantasy. And it puts you into a situation not only where you have the ability to gain more and more power, which fuels the meaning quest, but also it gives you a mission. Like, it literally creates the meaning for you, and you imagine that you're on this mission to save the world, to do whatever it is that you're doing, go on a mission to destroy the bad guys, et cetera, et cetera. And it gives you this rush. And this is the kind of thing that I saw in war veterans, and that many of them, even though they were severely traumatized by the things that they saw, they would sometimes want to go back to that because they got that rush of meaning. They would tell me that it was the most alive that they ever felt. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that these video games are hitting, and that's the rush that you're getting with that. If you lack meaning and you lack belonging and safety, you will be more vulnerable to getting so sucked into these things that you get lost in it, and then you're in an addictive situation. Pornography, I think that one's fairly obvious. It's the quest for sexual intercourse, sexual activity. That's going to be along the meaning axis of this whole situation. But I would also include things like steamy romances, where there's a guy with no shirt on the cover, that kind of stuff, because it's still seeking that kind of ideal mating situation, whether it's from a male or female perspective, or what have you. What about the other ones I mentioned? Gambling. So gambling is about resource acquisition. The rush from gambling addiction is that quest for meaning in the form of resource acquisition and the gaining of the power that goes along with it. Shopping. Curiously enough, you can get addicted to shopping, which is spending all kinds of resources, but that's not what the rush is. The rush is in the thing that you're getting from the money. So it's really just the same kind of addiction as the gambling addiction. It's just not focused on the currency, it's focused on the stuff that the currency can get for you. So it's focused on the second half of the process of resource acquisition, really. Fitness is about gaining social currency, if you will. A lot of that has to do with looks, and you can get people addicted to using all kinds of supplements and what have you. This is where your body dysmorphias can kind of come into play as well. All of these things, though, it's underlying them is the intense quest for meaning, safety, and belonging. Finally, you've got eating disorders. Again, resource acquisition in this very bodily sense. You're acquiring resources, and in order to fill the emptiness, they literally fill it with food. But that's really what it's all about. It's this quest to fill the emptiness. And the emptiness comes from a lack of meaning, a lack of sense of safety relative, and a lack of feeling of belonging. All these addictive behaviors are aimed at satisfying that emptiness and that hunger. But of course, the problem is they don't exactly match the thing that is being sought. They are counterfeits. They're junk food, if you will. And even though they give you that surge of neurochemicals because biology can't afford to be precise, biology puts in place superficial signifiers for those long-term goals that do result in success of the species, but because it doesn't match it perfectly, because we can't, biology just doesn't work like that. It's never that precise. Then you can get stuck in these things where you're seeking out the counterfeits of those three main goals. There's nothing wrong with seeking meaning, safety, and belonging, of course. But if you're seeking things that superficially tell you that you are gaining them, but they really aren't, that's when you're in an addictive situation. That's when you're in the danger zone. Okay, so hopefully that answers the question. If you enjoyed this content, click like, subscribe, welcome aboard. Check out my website, ericgoodwyn.com. I discuss fiction, nonfiction, all kinds of things related to the imagination, psyche, story, quest for meaning, all that kind of stuff. And until next time, I'll see you later.